The stars had always held a certain mystery, but on this particular day they were no longer a thing of wonder. They were silent witnesses to a battle that seemed to stretch the limits of imagination. Out on the edge of the galaxy, near the human colonies, the people had lived in relative peace for many years. Their new world was supposed to be a place of opportunity, a fresh start far from the wars that once ravaged Earth. But the universe had a way of shaking even the most hopeful dreams. The war began as most wars did, small, then growing, until it became an unstoppable force. The colonies on this distant planet named Paxis had been fighting a neighboring alien species, the Shari, over territory and resources. It wasn't long before things escalated, and the once peaceful skies above Paxis turned dark with the smoke of battle. The Shari were known for their ruthlessness, and their ships, sharp and fast like the predators of their home planet, were capable of wiping out entire fleets. But there was something else, something more terrifying, that the humans had yet to face. It had been years since the name Turgath had been whispered in the halls of the Galactic Council, a name that filled the hearts of even the bravest warriors with fear. Turgath was not a ship. It was not a weapon. Turgath was something far worse. Turgath was a Draconis Terralith, one of the oldest, most deadly species of alien dragons known to exist. This creature was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Its scales were made of a rare, nearly indestructible material, its claws could tear through metal like paper, and its fiery breath could melt a starship in seconds. To face Turgath was to face certain death. The Shari, desperate to end the conflict and assert their dominance, had made a terrible decision. They had unleashed Turgath on the human colonies. The dragon descended from the heavens like a storm of fire and destruction. Ships that had once patrolled the skies fell helplessly to the ground, shattered by Turgath's power. The ground itself trembled beneath its massive feet as it landed, creating deep craters wherever it stepped. The people of Paxis could do nothing but watch in horror as the beast tore through their defenses like they were made of paper. In the midst of all this destruction, a small group of human leaders gathered in an underground command center, trying to come up with a plan to save their world. They had no weapons that could match the power of Turgath, no army capable of standing against its might. Despair hung in the air, thick and heavy. Every strategy they discussed seemed futile. Among them, however, was one name that kept coming up, a name that no one quite understood but all had heard of: Lila. Lila was a young girl, no older than 8 years old, who had grown up on Paxis. She wasn't a soldier, a leader, or even someone with any special training. She was simply a child. But Lila had something that no one else did, an unusual connection to the world around her. The humans had never fully understood what it was, but they knew that Lila seemed to have a way with things. She could make flowers bloom where they shouldn't, calm animals in distress, and even help the most difficult machines work by just touching them. No one had ever fully grasped the extent of her abilities. But in these desperate times, the humans had no choice but to turn to her. The leaders, exhausted and defeated, agreed to send Lila to face Turgath. It was a last-ditch effort, a desperate hope that perhaps this child's strange gift could do what no weapon or army could. The plan was simple, yet absurd. Lila would walk alone to the battlefield to where Turgath had landed. She would go unarmed, unprotected, and without any strategy. The adults couldn't help but wonder if they were sending her to her death. But as they watched her prepare, there was something about Lila that gave them a sliver of hope. Her calm demeanor, her steady hands, and the quiet way she seemed to understand the gravity of the situation filled them with something unexpected. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could make a difference. Lila didn't seem afraid. She had seen the destruction around her, heard the screams of the terrified civilians, and witnessed the explosions that lit the sky like a fiery sunset. But none of it seemed to affect her. As she walked, her small feet barely making a sound on the cracked ground. She had a look of quiet determination. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a leader. But in that moment, she was something more important than both. When she reached the site of the crash, the air was thick with smoke. Turgath's massive body lay sprawled across the earth, its wings stretched out like the sails of a ship. Its scales shimmered in the dim light, a mix of dark reds, blacks, and shimmering golds. Its eyes, however, were closed. The dragon appeared to be resting, though the ground around it was scorched, and the remains of what had once been human structures lay scattered and broken. Turgath's mere presence seemed to choke the life out of the air. There was a deep, unsettling silence as Lila approached the great beast. No one else dared to get close. The humans, watching from their command center, held their breath. What could this girl possibly do? Lila took another step forward, and then another, until she was standing directly in front of Turgath. She looked up at the dragon, her small face calm and unafraid. The great creature's eyes flickered open, revealing yellow irises like burning suns. It blinked once, and then again, studying the girl before it. The humans held their breath, wondering what would happen next. Would Turgath lash out in anger? Would it roar and burn everything in sight? But instead, something surprising happened. Turgath remained still, watching Lila with an intensity that was almost curious. The dragon, known for its terrible wrath, showed no signs of attacking. It seemed to be waiting for something. Lila didn't flinch. She simply stood there, her gaze meeting Turgath's. The humans could only watch in disbelief as the tension in the air grew thick. Then, in a quiet, unexpected moment, Lila raised her hand. Slowly, almost reverently, she placed it on the dragon's enormous snout. For a moment, there was no sound. Turgath's body shuddered slightly, as if unsure of what was happening. The dragon, who had destroyed entire cities, had never been touched like this before. It was a strange and gentle gesture, unlike anything it had ever experienced. The humans, still watching from the command center, couldn't understand what they were seeing. What was this child doing? How could she remain so calm in the presence of such a beast? Had she lost her mind? But Lila wasn't afraid. She stood there, hand pressed gently against Turgath's nose, her eyes closed. She wasn't trying to fight it or tame it. She wasn't pleading for mercy. She was simply there. And in that moment, something shifted. The air seemed to hum with a strange energy, a quiet peace that no one had expected. Even the ground beneath their feet felt softer, less heavy. The dragon, Turgath, seemed to relax. The anger that had once burned so brightly within it seemed to fade, if only for a moment. The tension in the air began to ease. Lila had done something no one thought possible. She had reached the beast in a way no weapon or army could. As Lila stood there, her hand on Turgath's nose, the battle outside began to quiet. The war, it seemed, was no longer the only thing on the minds of those watching. Something incredible was happening, and nobody could quite explain it yet. You said, the silence that followed was not a peaceful one. It was thick with uncertainty, hanging in the air like a heavy fog. The humans and aliens watching from their distant command centers could not believe their eyes. There, in front of the most dangerous creature in the galaxy, stood a small human girl. She was nothing like the brave warriors or trained diplomats they had sent to face the enemy. Yet, she was doing something they never could have imagined, something that seemed to be working. Turgath, the mighty dragon, remained still. The massive creature's yellow eyes, glowing like twin suns, were locked on Lila, who stood before it, completely unafraid. The humans in the command center could see her clearly on the screens. They saw her small hand resting on the dragon's enormous nose. And they saw the strange calm that had settled around the beast, something none of them had ever witnessed. It was as though Turgath itself was unsure what to do next. Lila's presence was like a strange magnet that drew everything toward her, even the dragon. Her heart was racing, yet her face remained peaceful, focused only on the creature in front of her. The more time passed, the more Turgath seemed to calm. The heat of its breath faded, and its great wings, which had once been spread wide and ready to strike, slowly lowered. The ground, which had once trembled under the weight of its fury, seemed to settle. Lila didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her actions alone were speaking louder than any words could. It was as though she understood something the others did not. She understood the language of peace, and it was working. But who was this girl? Why was she chosen to stand before Turgath, the dragon who had crushed entire civilizations without mercy? What made her so special? The answers were hidden deep, even from the humans themselves. Lila had always been different. She had been born on Paxis, one of the newer human colonies, far from Earth. Her parents, both scientists, had been among the first to study the strange environment of the planet. They were not prepared for the unusual connection that their daughter would form with the world around her. From a very young age, Lila had shown an incredible understanding of the natural world. She could make plants grow in places they shouldn't, calm restless animals, and even heal small wounds with a touch. But it wasn't just the natural world that Lila seemed to connect with. There was something else, something deeper. It was as if she could sense emotions and intentions, not only of people but also of the land, the animals, and even the machines. Her mother and father, both brilliant minds, had tried to explain it. They had studied her every action, looking for some scientific explanation. But no formula or theory could explain her abilities. Lila had never been taught to control her strange gift. She simply knew things, as if she had been born with the answers to questions no one had thought to ask. It was as though the universe itself was speaking to her in a language only she could understand. Back on Paxis, the situation was growing more desperate. The Sherry forces had used Turgath to bring humanity to its knees, but despite the terror that the dragon had spread, the humans were not giving up. They fought back with every weapon they had, even though they knew it was pointless. The soldiers, once strong and proud, had begun to lose hope. Their homes were in ruins, their families scattered, and the future of Paxis seemed bleak. That was when Lila had appeared, almost as if she had been called there by something greater than the war itself. She had been playing outside, something so simple and innocent, when her father had come rushing to her, his face pale with fear. He had told her that Turgath was coming, and that the planet's survival depended on her. At first, Lila had been confused. She didn't understand why they would send her, a child, to do what armies of grown men could not. But then she had felt it. A soft pull in her chest, a whisper from the stars themselves. She didn't need to understand. All she had to do was go. Her parents, torn between fear and belief, had reluctantly agreed to let her go. And so, Lila had walked alone to the battlefield, her tiny feet steady and strong. Back in the present, as Lila stood before Turgath, the dragon's enormous form felt both intimidating and majestic. Every part of it seemed powerful, its thick, armored scales, its sharp claws that could crush anything in its path, its fiery breath that had turned cities to ash. Yet in that moment, as Lila's hand rested on its nose, the great creature seemed less like a monster and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Turgath blinked slowly, its massive golden eyes studying the girl before it. And then, something truly unexpected happened. The dragon's head, which had once been raised high in pride and power, lowered slightly as though it was acknowledging Lila's presence. The tension that had once filled the air began to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness. Lila's hand was still on Turgath's nose, But now she allowed her fingers to gently trace the dragon's scales. They were rough, almost stone-like, but they had a strange warmth to them, as if they were alive. She didn't know why she was doing this. She didn't know what it meant. She only knew that it was what she had to do. Her eyes closed briefly as she focused on the strange, pulsing energy beneath her fingertips. The dragon's energy, its anger and fear, seemed to quiet. In that moment, Lila understood something important. Tergath wasn't just a creature of destruction. It was a creature of pain, a creature that had been driven to violence, just as the people of Paxis had been driven to war. The dragon had been fighting for so long that it had forgotten what peace felt like. Lila whispered softly. Her words meant only for Tergath. "You don't have to be angry anymore. It's okay. You're not alone." The words, though simple, carried a weight that could not be ignored. They seemed to sink into the air, wrapping around the dragon like a soft blanket, soothing the fire that had once burned so hot within it. For the first time, Tergath didn't respond with a roar. It didn't attack or prepare to fight. Instead, the dragon stayed where it was, its great head lowered even further until it was level with Lila. The two stood like that for what felt like an eternity, an enormous, powerful creature and a tiny, unassuming child, both connected by something that no one could see, but both felt deeply. From a distance, the human leaders watching through their screens couldn't understand what was happening. All they could do was watch, wide-eyed and amazed. Was this some kind of miracle? Was it truly possible that this little girl, with no weapon and no training, had found a way to tame the most dangerous creature in the galaxy? And for the first time in days, hope flickered in the hearts of the people of Paxis. Could this be the turning point? Could peace really be possible, even in the face of such overwhelming destruction? As Lila stood before Tergath, the dragon's massive form still and calm, she didn't know the answer. She only knew that she had to keep going. She had to keep reaching out, not just to the dragon, but to the whole universe around her. There was more to this world than violence and war. There was more to this galaxy than destruction and pain. And if she could reach Tergath, then maybe, just maybe, she could help the galaxy remember what peace felt like too. Across the stars, on distant planets, in the quiet corners of the galaxy, every eye was fixed on the screens that displayed the scene unfolding on Paxis. The mighty Draconis Terralith, Tergath, the terror of the universe, was now standing still, its massive form towering over a tiny human girl who stood before it, her hand gently resting on its snout. No one could explain it. No one could believe it. Tergath, the dragon that had destroyed entire cities, the dragon that had been sent to end the human colonies once and for all, was not attacking. It wasn't roaring in rage. It wasn't unleashing its deadly fire. Instead, it seemed calm, almost peaceful. The commanders and leaders of the human forces, who had been watching with tense anticipation, exchanged glances. It wasn't just the humans who were watching, though. The Shari, the alien species responsible for unleashing Tergath on the humans, had their eyes on the screens too. They had expected the dragon to wipe out the human colony in a matter of hours. They had expected Tergath to tear through the humans like paper. Yet now, the Shari watched, dumbfounded. On the battlefield, a strange quiet settled. The air, once filled with the sounds of explosions and shouts, was now eerily still. The soldiers on both sides, their weapons raised and ready for battle, looked to their leaders, waiting for orders. But none came. They didn't know what to do. The impossible was happening. Lila, standing alone before Tergath, didn't feel fear. She had no idea what was going through the minds of the soldiers or the leaders. She didn't care. All she knew was that something was happening between her and the dragon. She could feel it, deep within her chest. a strange connection, like a soft pulse in the air, resonating between them. Her hand remained on Turgath's snout, and she felt the dragon's warmth beneath her fingers. The scales, once cold and hard as metal, now seemed to soften, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air. It wasn't a growl, though. It was something else, something more like a sigh. The great dragon, whose very presence had once inspired terror, seemed to be breathing slower, its once bright yellow eyes no longer burning with fury. There was something almost gentle in its gaze now. Turgath's massive body, which had once been poised to destroy, now sat quietly on the ground, its enormous wings tucked in close to its sides. But just as the atmosphere seemed to relax, a new sound broke through the silence, a loud cracking roar from deep within the dragon's chest. The ground shook, and the air vibrated with the force of it. The humans in the command center jumped back in surprise, their hearts racing. Was this the end? Had Lila failed? Was the dragon going to attack now? Lila's eyes widened as Turgath's great head jerked back. She could feel the tension building in the dragon's body, and she knew that it wasn't completely calm yet. Something inside it was still fighting. Still filled with anger and frustration, the echoes of its long history of destruction. But Lila didn't pull away. She stayed where she was, her hand still resting on the dragon's nose, her gaze soft but steady. She knew what she had to do. As Turgath's roar subsided, the ground stopped shaking, and the dragon's head began to lower once again. But this time, something was different. Lila could see it clearly. The dragon's eyes, those terrifying eyes, had softened. They were no longer burning with rage. Instead, there was a flicker of confusion, almost as if Turgath was trying to understand what was happening. Lila took a deep breath, steadying herself. She spoke to the dragon in a calm voice, her words barely more than a whisper, but somehow they reached across the distance between them. "You don't have to hurt anyone," she said softly. "I know you're angry, but you don't have to destroy everything." The dragon's eyes flickered, the smallest hint of hesitation appearing in its gaze. It was as if Lila's words were making sense, but the dragon didn't know what to do with them. It had always been a creature of destruction, a force of nature that left nothing in its wake but ashes and ruins. But now, in the presence of this tiny human girl, something was shifting inside it. For the first time in what felt like centuries, Turgath's massive body seemed to relax. The fire that had burned so brightly within it began to fade. The heat that had radiated from its mouth, capable of melting entire ships, cooled. The once feared dragon was still powerful, still a force to be reckoned with, but it wasn't the monster it had been before. Lila, feeling the change in the air, reached out again. This time she touched the dragon's snout more gently, more deliberately, as if she were guiding it towards something better. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't trying to tame the beast. She was trying to understand it. Turgath's great head tilted slightly, as though the dragon was studying her, trying to figure out this small creature who had dared to approach it without fear, who had touched it with kindness instead of violence. But just as Lila felt a moment of quiet victory, the unexpected happened. From the distance, a sudden flash of light blazed across the sky. A ship, flying at high speed, appeared out of nowhere, breaking through the clouds. It was a large craft, and it was coming in fast. It didn't belong to the humans. It didn't belong to the Scifi either. The ship was old, its hull scarred by years of battle. But what was even more disturbing was the banner it carried, bright and unmistakable. The ship was a warship, and it had come to fight. The humans in the command center gasped. They recognized the ship's design instantly. It was the vessel of the Varkari, a fierce and bloodthirsty species known for their merciless tactics and their hatred for anything they didn't understand. The Varkari had never liked the humans. They had been waiting for an opportunity to strike, and now, seeing Turgath, the greatest weapon in the galaxy, seemingly subdued, they believed it was their moment. Lila turned toward the incoming ship, her eyes narrowing. She could feel the change in the air. The tension, which had momentarily disappeared, was back. The humans and aliens watching from a distance felt it too. The Varkari were coming, and they didn't care about peace. They cared only about power, about taking control of everything in their path. Turgath's head snapped toward the incoming ship, its once calm demeanor replaced by the fiery rage that had defined it for so long. It had felt the threat. It had sensed the danger. The ancient dragon's eyes burned once again with fury, and a low growl rumbled deep within its chest. Lila's heart raced. She knew what Turgath was thinking. She could feel it. The dragon had been ready to accept peace, to end the cycle of destruction. But now, with the arrival of the Varkari, the dragon's instincts were kicking in again. It was prepared to fight. The warship of the Varkari descended faster, its weapons charging up, ready to fire. The moment of calm that Lila had created was slipping away. Lila couldn't let it happen. She couldn't let Turgath return to its old ways. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "Please," she whispered, looking up at the dragon. "Please don't fight. Not anymore." But the dragon didn't respond. It had already begun to stand, its massive body shifting, preparing for battle. The Varkari ship, now within striking distance, was locked in its sights. Lila closed her eyes. She couldn't let it end this way. There had to be another way. She had to find it. Lila stood at the center of the battlefield, frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. The sound of the Varkari warship's engines filled the air, growing louder with every second as it descended toward the ground. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. The tension building as the dragon Turgath, once calm, began to stir again, sensing the threat in the air. Turgath's massive body, which had been so still just moments ago, now shifted. Its wings began to unfurl, great and powerful, blocking out the sky. The dragon's golden eyes, which had softened in Lila's presence, now burned with a fierce anger, flashing with memories of the destruction it had caused in the past. The ancient creature, who had learned to control its rage, was now ready to unleash it all over again. Lila looked up at the dragon, her small frame dwarfed by its enormous size. Her fingers still rested on Turgath's snout, but she knew that if the dragon fully gave in to its instincts, everything would be lost. The fragile peace she had worked so hard to create would shatter. Turgath would return to its destructive ways, and the humans and the aliens would once again be locked in a battle they couldn't win. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She needed to think. She needed to find a way to stop the dragon from attacking. But how? She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a trained negotiator. She was just a little girl who had somehow managed to calm the fiercest creature in the galaxy. But now, the stakes were higher. The Varkari were coming, and they would not stop until they had taken what they wanted. Lila opened her eyes and looked at Turgath once more. The dragon's eyes were now narrowed, its enormous body tense and ready for a fight. But something still lingered in those eyes, something that wasn't anger, something that felt vulnerable. Turgath had been a creature of war for centuries. It had been a weapon, used and controlled by others. It had never known peace, never known kindness, never known the feeling of being understood. But now, in front of this tiny human girl, the dragon was beginning to see something different. Lila had shown it that there was more to the universe than destruction, more to life than fighting. She could feel it in the air. The dragon was fighting with itself. Its instincts screamed for battle, for violence, for revenge. But a small part of it, something deep inside, was beginning to question that. Lila could feel that part. She could feel the dragon's heart, its soul, torn between two paths. Lila knew that this moment was her chance. She could not let it slip away. She couldn't let Turgath go back to the way it was. Not after everything she had seen, not after everything they had been through. She had to find a way to show the dragon that peace was possible. She stepped forward, closer to the great beast, her hand still on its snout. She could hear the distant hum of the Varkari ship, still coming closer. But for now, she focused only on Turgath. Lila's voice was calm, soft, but filled with an energy that carried across the battlefield. "You don't have to fight anymore," she whispered. "It's not your path. There's another way." The dragon's eyes flickered at her words, and for a moment the great creature paused. It was as though the world itself held its breath. Turgath's wings twitched, and the rumble of its chest slowed. The ancient dragon, who had been a force of destruction for so long, seemed to hesitate. Was it possible that it could change? Was it possible that the dragon could choose peace over battle? Lila didn't know the answer, but she knew that now was the time. She had to do something bold. She had to show Turgath that peace wasn't just a choice. It was a way forward, a way to live in a world that could heal. With that thought, Lila did something no one expected. She took a step forward, closing the space between herself and the dragon. She reached up and gently kissed Turgath on the nose. It was a simple gesture, nothing grand or elaborate, but in that moment, it was everything. The kiss wasn't just a sign of kindness or affection. It was a promise that no matter how fierce or broken something was, it could still be healed. That even the most terrifying creatures could find peace. For a long moment, there was no sound. The air was still, and the distant hum of the Varkari warship seemed to fade into the background. All that mattered was the quiet connection between Lila and the dragon. And then, something remarkable happened. Turgath's body, which had been poised for destruction, began to relax. Slowly, its massive form shifted, and its wings folded in close to its sides. The great creature lowered its head once more, its golden eyes softening. The rage that had once burned so brightly within it began to fade, replaced by something else, something that had been buried deep for so long, a sense of peace. The dragon let out a low, rumbling sound, not a growl, but a sigh, a deep exhale that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of pain. It was the sound of release. Turgath had chosen peace. It had chosen to listen, to understand, and to accept something greater than the cycle of violence it had known. Lila stepped back slowly, keeping her gaze on the dragon. She felt a deep sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had reached the creature that no one thought could be reached. She had tamed the beast, not with force or weapons, but with kindness and a simple act of love. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. The Varkari ship, still hovering above the battlefield, had seen what had just happened. The warship was now in full view, and its weapons were charged, ready to fire. The Varkari had no intention of stopping. They had come for power, and they would not back down just because a little girl had made a dragon choose peace. Lila turned her gaze toward the ship. Her heart pounded again. She knew the Varkari would not hesitate. They had come to fight, and they would not be deterred by anything, not even the sight of a dragon who had chosen peace. But Lila wasn't done yet. She looked back at Turgath, who was now standing tall and calm, his massive form casting a shadow over her. The dragon had chosen peace, but could it protect it? Lila took a deep breath and stepped forward, her hand still on the dragon's nose. She whispered once more, softly, as if to herself. Together. Turgath's golden eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time the dragon understood. It wasn't just about peace. It was about standing together, protecting the future from those who would destroy it. With a powerful movement, Turgath spread its wings wide, sending gusts of wind across the battlefield. The ground trembled as the dragon took to the skies, its massive wings cutting through the air. It was a symbol of strength and hope, and for the first time, Turgath wasn't just a weapon of destruction, it was a guardian. The Varkari ship began to charge its weapons, but before it could fire, Turgath let out a roar, a mighty, thunderous sound that shook the very sky. The roar was not one of anger, but one of warning. The dragon was telling them, "This ends now." The Varkari ship hesitated. The crew on board, who had expected to easily overpower the humans and the dragon, were now unsure. The dragon wasn't what they thought it was. It wasn't a weapon, it was something more. And with that, the Varkari ship turned and retreated, flying off into the distance, leaving the battlefield behind. The war was over. Lila stood there, her heart still racing, but now filled with something else. Hope. The impossible had been done. The dragon had chosen peace, and together, they had shown the galaxy that even the fiercest creatures could change, that even the darkest past could be left behind for a brighter future. The once barren battlefield, marked by the scars of destruction, was now still. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the soft hum of the wind. The humans and aliens who had been watching from their command centers, the soldiers who had once prepared for the final battle, now stood in awe. What had they just witnessed? Turgath, the dragon who had torn through entire worlds, had turned its back on destruction. The great creature now stood tall, its massive wings folded against its body, no longer a symbol of terror, but of something new, something hopeful. Lila stood in front of the dragon, her small form barely visible beneath its shadow. The girl who had kissed the nose of the deadliest dragon in the galaxy, who had reached out with nothing but kindness and love, was now the center of attention. Her heart raced, but not with fear. This time, it was with relief. She had done it. She had done something no one else could have imagined. The world around them was changing. The Shari, the alien species who had brought Turgath to the humans, watched from a distance. They had seen the power of the dragon firsthand, but now, the same creature that had once been a tool of their war had turned against them. The Shari, too, stood in silence, unsure of what to do next. For the first time, they realized that they had underestimated the power of peace. The humans, once fearful of their impending doom, now saw something different. They had been on the edge of destruction, facing a force so powerful that nothing they had could have stopped it. But now there was hope. Turgath, the dragon who had been their greatest enemy, was now their protector. The creature that had been a weapon of war was now standing as a guardian, a symbol of the possibility that even the fiercest beasts could change. Lila had done it. She had reached the heart of Turgath, shown the dragon that there was another way, and in doing so, had changed the course of history. Her simple act of kindness had turned the tide of war. But there was more to be done. The leaders of the human colonies, still in shock, slowly began to gather. They watched as Lila stepped forward, her hand resting on Turgath's nose, her face calm but filled with the quiet strength of someone who had seen the impossible become reality. They knew they needed to act quickly. They needed to find a way to rebuild, to ensure that peace would last. One by one, the leaders approached Lila, their eyes filled with a mix of admiration and disbelief. They had never expected that a child, someone so young, so innocent, could be the one to bring about such change. The galaxy had been on the brink of war, and now it seemed as if the winds of peace were blowing through once more. "How?" one of the leaders asked softly, his voice filled with wonder. "How did you do it? How did you make Turgath choose peace?" Lila looked up at the man, her eyes gentle but firm. "I didn't make him do anything. I just showed him that there was another way," she said. He wasn't born to destroy. He was made to destroy. But deep down, I think he wanted something different. The leader nodded, still struggling to understand, but grateful for her words. The galaxy had witnessed something extraordinary. The dragon, a creature of war, had been tamed not by force, but by understanding. The peace that Lila had brought wasn't just a ceasefire. It was a beginning. A new chapter for all those who had been caught in the cycle of violence. But the journey was far from over. The Varkari, who had been watching from their ships, had retreated for now, but they would not stay away forever. The galaxy was full of factions and species that thrived on conflict. The galaxy was full of people who would rather fight than seek peace. And while Lila's act had shown that change was possible, there was still much work to be done. As the days passed, word of Lila's bravery spread across the stars. She became a symbol of hope, of what could be achieved when people reached out with understanding instead of weapons. Her name was whispered in the halls of the Galactic Council, and her story was told in every corner of the galaxy. Even the Shari, who had started the war, couldn't ignore the impact of what had happened. Their leaders, once proud of their ability to wield such power, were now forced to rethink their actions. Lila had changed everything, but there were still those who would challenge this new peace. The Varkari would return, as would others who saw war as a way to gain power. But now, humanity and its allies were united in a way they hadn't been before. They were united by the belief that peace could be stronger than any weapon, that understanding could defeat hate. Tergath, once the deadliest creature in the galaxy, now stood by Lila's side. The dragon had chosen to protect the people it had once threatened, and with each passing day, its loyalty grew stronger. The bond between the dragon and the girl was undeniable. Tergath had become more than just a guardian. It had become a part of something greater, a part of the galaxy's future. The humans on Paxis, those who had once been desperate and afraid, began to rebuild. They repaired their homes, rebuilt their cities, and most importantly, they began to rebuild their trust in each other. The war had taught them the cost of division, but it had also shown them the power of unity. Lila continued to visit Tergath every day. She would sit by the dragon's side, her small hand resting on its scales, talking to it as if it were a friend. She didn't see the dragon as a weapon, nor did she see it as a monster. She saw it for what it truly was, a creature who had been lost, just like so many others. Tergath, in return, had come to see Lila as a kind of protector, not just of the people of Paxis, but of peace itself. But even as the peace grew stronger, Lila knew the work was never truly done. There would always be those who would try to tear the galaxy apart, those who would seek conflict over peace. But Lila had learned something that no one else had known before. Peace wasn't just a choice. It was a responsibility. And it was a responsibility that everyone, no matter how small, had to share. In time, the galaxy began to change. Wars became fewer. The galaxy's people began to work together in ways that had once seemed impossible. The idea that peace could be chosen, that even the most dangerous creatures could be tamed, began to take root. It wasn't just about ending battles. It was about changing hearts. And in this new world, Lila's legacy would live on. Years passed, and the story of the girl who kissed the nose of the deadliest dragon was told in every corner of the galaxy. It became a story not just about a dragon, but about humanity itself. A story about the power of kindness, the strength in understanding, and the ability to choose peace in the face of war. Lila never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a girl who wanted to make the world a better place. But in the end, that's exactly what she had done. And as she stood beside Tergath, looking out over the peaceful world they had helped create, she knew one thing for sure. The galaxy had changed. and it was a change that would last forever.